Most countries replaced nature as they developed. Forests were cleared. Land was divided. Space was controlled. Gabon didn't follow that path. Here, vast areas remain untouched, not preserved carefully, but never overtaken. To understand Gabon, you have to stop thinking of nature as something that survived and start thinking of it as something that never stepped aside, where the forest never ends. From above, Gabon looks almost entirely green. This is the Gabonese rainforest. Here's the first shock. The forest isn't a region, it's the default. Roads are limited. Clearings are rare. Movement feels absorbed rather than guided. The canopy stretches unbroken for hundreds of kilometers. Flight paths reveal what maps can't fully convey. The sheer density of green that dominates every angle. Satellite images show formations that look unchanged from decades ago, patterns that repeat without variation. The land doesn't open easily. It resists being divided. In many places, distance isn't measured by kilometers, it's measured by how long the forest allows you through. Navigation here follows different logic. Routes depend on river positions, seasonal flooding, animal migration corridors. What looks like 10 kilometers on a map can become a full day's journey when the terrain decides otherwise. The humidity never fully breaks. Even in clearings, the air carries weight. Sounds travel differently, absorbed by layers of vegetation, muffled by moisture. Silence here isn't empty, it's dense with presence. This isn't wilderness carved out of development. This is what remains when development never arrived in force, when the jungle meets the ocean. Along Gabon's coast, something feels wrong, in a quiet way. This is Ivindo National Park. Here's the shock. Dense rainforest runs straight into open beach. No buffer, no transition, no development line. Wildlife crosses sand. Forest reaches saltwater. The boundary never formed. Elephants walk beaches where tourists would normally expect only seabirds. Hippos emerge from lagoons meters from ocean surf. Buffalo herds move between forest shade and coastal exposure within minutes. The ecological collision creates images that feel digitally altered. Forest elephants against Atlantic waves. Dense jungle canopy ending at tidal zones. Mangrove systems meeting primary rainforest without graduated transition. Even the beaches feel occupied, not by development, but by the ecosystems they serve. Turtle nesting sites remain undisturbed. Driftwood accumulates naturally. Tidal patterns shape the sand without interference from coastal engineering. This is what shorelines look like when the ocean and forest negotiate directly. Then the forest tightens, where water moves the land. In central Gabon lies Ivindo National Park. Here's what feels unsettling. Water dominates movement. Rivers dictate routes. Waterfalls interrupt progress. Bridges are rare. The Congo Falls and Minguli Falls don't just break the river. They define accessibility to entire regions. Water volume changes seasonally, opening and closing passage. What's navigable in dry months becomes impassable when rains arrive. This isn't terrain you pass through casually. Rapids appear without warning. River depth changes across short distances. Currents shift based on upstream rainfall that happened days earlier, kilometers away. The land doesn't accommodate shortcuts. It forces alignment. Even aerial access remains limited. Dense canopy prevents easy landing zones. Weather patterns create unpredictable visibility. The forest doesn't yield space for infrastructure. This is terrain that requires negotiation, not conquest. If you're interested in destinations where nature still sets the rules and modern systems feel secondary, subscribe. This channel explores places shaped by conditions, not convenience. Stakes reset. Why this matters? Because in Gabon, when systems stop, the environment doesn't wait for them to recover. It continues uninterrupted. Infrastructure here exists on borrowed terms. When roads fall into disrepair, forest reclaims them. When settlements contract, vegetation fills the space. The land doesn't preserve human absence, it erases it. Where ecosystems collide. In parts of Gabon, forest suddenly opens into grassland. This is Lopé National Park. Here's the shock. Two ecosystems exist side by side, without gradual blending. Dense jungle, open savanna, immediate contrast. The transition happens across meters, not kilometers. Forest edge doesn't gradually thin. Canopy doesn't slowly break. The ecosystems meet at sharp boundaries, creating visual discontinuity that feels geographically wrong. The land doesn't smooth transitions, it stacks them. Movement feels abrupt. Navigation feels uncertain. Species from both environments overlap in these zones. Forest elephants and savanna buffalo share territory. Primates adapted to canopy life appear near grassland antelope species. Predator populations navigate both ecosystems. The contrast reveals something crucial. These aren't carefully managed conservation zones. These are active, dynamic ecosystems functioning without human intervention. When a city feels temporary. Along the coast sits Libreville. Here's the contrast. The city exists, but lightly. Nature presses in. Green fills gaps. Boundaries feel soft. Urban density here never reaches the compression found in other capitals. Buildings don't stack aggressively. Development doesn't consume every available meter. Space between structures remains. Urban life doesn't dominate its surroundings. It coexists carefully. Vegetation appears in unexpected places, between buildings, along infrastructure, in supposedly developed zones. The city's footprint expands and contracts based on economic conditions, population shifts, political priorities. Nature doesn't wait for permanence. Libreville doesn't overwhelm the landscape. It negotiates with it. This isn't careful urban planning. It's development that never achieved total dominance. The difference reveals itself in how quickly nature responds when human pressure decreases. Even the urban experience feels conditional. Infrastructure serves current needs without assuming permanence. Development adapts to environmental constraints rather than engineering solutions to overcome them, where distance still means isolation. In the north, vast protected areas stretch without interruption. This is Lopé National Park. Here's the quiet shock. Large areas have no permanent human presence. No settlements, no infrastructure, no compression. Distance here still means separation. Technology hasn't erased it. Development hasn't softened it. These aren't accessible nature experiences. These are regions that remain functionally separate from human systems. Communication networks don't reach. Transportation corridors don't penetrate. Emergency services can't easily respond. The isolation isn't romantic, it's absolute. Weather events trap people. Medical emergencies become critical instantly. Equipment failure creates genuine danger. The environment doesn't accommodate human error. This remoteness preserves conditions rarely found elsewhere. Species populations evolve without human pressure. Ecological processes continue unobserved. Natural selection operates without artificial interference. The park's size creates its own challenges. Monitoring remains sparse. Enforcement stays limited. Understanding of what actually occurs within these boundaries stays incomplete. This is what true wilderness actually means, not scenic beauty, but functional separation from human systems. Why Gabon feels unfamiliar? Most modern places prioritize access. Gabon prioritizes continuity. Forest remains intact. Coastlines stay undeveloped. Water dictates movement. Ecosystems collide without mediation. Distance retains meaning. The country didn't adapt the land to people. People adapted around the land. That reversal is what feels unfamiliar. This isn't about preservation philosophy or conservation ethics. This is about economic development that never reached the scale required to fully transform the landscape. Population density that never demanded complete land conversion. Political priorities that never made total environmental control the central goal. Gabon reveals what happens when modernization occurs without requiring total environmental replacement. Infrastructure exists, but doesn't dominate. Cities function, but don't consume. Economic activity continues, but doesn't demand complete land conversion. The result is a country where nature isn't a protected category. It's the persistent default condition. This creates spatial relationships unfamiliar to most modern travelers. Destinations here aren't accessed, they're negotiated with. Schedules aren't fixed, they're conditional. Routes aren't guaranteed, they're environmental dependent. Gabon isn't untouched by accident. It's untouched because it was never fully replaced. forest that refuses division, wildlife that reaches the ocean, rivers that control movement, cities that stay restrained, distances that remain absolute. These places weren't shaped to feel accessible. They exist because nature here never stepped aside. The country's low population density, roughly 8 people per square kilometer, means vast areas remain beyond regular human influence. Economic reliance on selective resource extraction rather than total land conversion left ecosystems largely intact. Political stability without massive infrastructure drives preserved the status quo. This isn't pristine wilderness. This is nature that continued functioning while human systems developed around rather than through it. If this video changed how you think about where destinations can exist, subscribe, because some of the most revealing places to visit aren't hidden. They were simply never overtaken.